Lishara stood at the edge of the banquet hall and watched her husband make an entire room full of aliens laugh. Ethan Mercer moved through the crowd like water. He shook hands with the tall, bone-armored Drethani ambassador, and somehow remembered the name of the man's youngest daughter. He bowed to the Silith delegation in exactly the right way, touching his chest instead of his forehead, because the Silith considered the forehead gesture an insult. He complimented the Orani trade minister on her new robe and asked about her mother's health. The minister's 4 eyes went wide with surprise, and then she smiled so hard that the translucent skin on her cheeks glowed pink. Nobody had told him to do any of this. He just remembered. He always remembered. Lishara sipped her drink and felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest. 2 years of marriage to this human, and he still surprised her. When her government had first proposed the union, she had been terrified. Humans were known across the galactic concord as an unpredictable species. They were too emotional, too attached, too willing to fight over things that other species would simply accept. The Velani Council had chosen her because she was calm, disciplined, and trained in diplomacy since birth. They told her she would need those skills. They were wrong. Ethan was the easiest person she had ever loved. He cooked for her every evening, not the nutrient paste that most species considered efficient, but real food, made with heat and oil and spices that he grew in small pots on the window ledge of their quarters. He learned her language in 6 months, not because he had to, but because he wanted to read her childhood poems to her in the original tongue. He was clumsy with the pronunciation at first, and she laughed at him, and he laughed too, and then he practiced until he got it right. He sang Velani lullabies to her younger sister Revka. Badly. Revka loved it. Across the hall, a cluster of Velani diplomats noticed her watching Ethan and exchanged glances. She knew what they were thinking. She had heard the whispers for 2 years. They called him a domesticated predator, a pet human. They said the humans had sent their softest, weakest representative, and that Lishara had married a man with no spine. She used to argue with them. Now she simply smiled and said nothing. Let them think what they wanted. They did not see him the way she did. They did not know the way he traced constellations on her silver skin at night, naming each one in both their languages. They did not know that he had cried the day her mother finally called him son. They did not know that he woke up early every morning just to watch the sunrise through the station viewport, and that when she asked him why, he said, "Because every sunrise is a promise that today could be better than yesterday." The man was absurdly, stubbornly kind, and Lishara loved him for it. The banquet continued, and the mood was warm, until it wasn't. Sub-Archon Threx of the Cathari hegemony stood up from his table. He was a tall insectoid creature, with black armored plates and eyes like chips of dark glass. The Cathari had never liked humans. They considered emotions a weakness, love a disease, and kindness a sign of genetic failure. Threx had made no secret of his contempt throughout the entire conference. Now he raised his glass and spoke loudly enough for the entire hall to hear. "I propose a toast," Threx said, his mandibles clicking in what passed for a smile among the Cathari. "To the humans, who once called themselves warriors, who now send poets and cooks to represent them among real civilizations, leashed beasts, pretending at civilization." The hall went silent. Every alien in the room turned to look at Ethan. Lishara's heart hammered in her chest. She set down her glass and took a step forward, ready to intervene. 2 years of diplomatic training screamed at her to act, to say something clever, to redirect the insult before it became an incident. Ethan got there first. He picked up his own glass, smiled at Threx with a warmth that looked completely genuine, and said, "I accept your toast, Sub-Archon, and I add to it. To the Cathari, who are so strong they have never needed kindness. That must be very lonely. I hope one day you find something worth being soft for." The room held its breath for 1 second. Then the Orani minister laughed. Then the Drethani ambassador laughed. Then half the hall was laughing with them, not at Threx but at the sheer absurdity of a human defusing a bomb with a smile. Someone clapped. Threx sat down, his mandibles tight with fury, and said nothing more. Lishara exhaled. Crisis over. Later that night, in the quiet of their quarters, she found Ethan standing at the viewport. The stars were cold and distant, scattered across the black like broken glass. His back was to her. He was not moving. "Ethan?" she said softly. "Are you all right?" What Threx said, it was cruel. "If it hurt you, you can tell me." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm, flat. "No," he said. "Words never hurt me." It was the way he said the word words that made her pause, as if he were separating that one small thing from all the other things that could hurt a person. As if words were so far down the list that they barely registered. She wanted to ask more. But he turned to her and smiled, and the warmth was back in his eyes, and she told herself she had imagined it. A few minutes later, Revka came running down the corridor in her sleeping gown, her silver hair wild, demanding a bedtime story. Ethan scooped her up and spun her around, and the child shrieked with laughter. He carried her to bed and told her a human fairy tale about a bear who loved honey, changing his voice for every character, making Revka giggle until her eyes closed. Lishara stood in the doorway and watched them. Of all the warriors the humans could have sent, she thought, they sent the kindest one. She went to bed that night feeling safe. Somewhere in the cold dark beyond the station, 14 Cathari warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and took position along the border of 3 star systems. Their weapons were hot. Their orders were clear. Nobody noticed. Not yet. The alarms came at dawn. Lishara was pulled from sleep by the sound of the station's emergency horns, a deep, pulsing wail that she had only ever heard during drills. Ethan was already out of bed, already dressed, already moving toward the door with a speed that didn't match a man who had been asleep 30 seconds ago. "Stay here," he said over his shoulder. "Keep Revka in her room." He was gone before she could answer. Within an hour, the Galactic Concord station was in chaos. Delegates ran through corridors. Translators shouted over each other. Holographic displays flickered with emergency broadcasts from 4 different star systems at the same time. The Cathari hegemony had launched a simultaneous invasion of 4 systems. Not border skirmishes, not raids. Full military assaults with ground troops, orbital bombardment, and occupation forces. 3 systems belonged to minor species who could barely defend themselves. The 4th was the Veilani colony world of Shael Mora. Lishara felt the floor tilt beneath her when she heard the name. Shael Mora, where her aunt lived, where her cousins raised their children, where her younger sister Revka had been visiting family just 2 weeks ago. Revka had only returned to the station 3 days before the attack. 3 days. If their schedule had been different by even a little, Revka would still be there, or so she thought. Ethan found her in the communications center, gripping the edge of a console, her silver skin pale. He put his arms around her and held her tightly. She pressed her face against his chest and listened to his heartbeat. Steady. Always steady. "I will fix this," he said quietly. "I will go to the Senate. I will propose a ceasefire framework. We will get your people out." She looked up at him. His eyes were warm and certain. She believed him. Ethan spent the next 2 days building a coalition. He barely slept. He moved from delegation to delegation, meeting with ambassadors, drafting proposals, making calls. He put together a peace plan that was so carefully constructed, so fair to all sides, that even the species who hated each other agreed to support it. He presented it to the full Concord Senate in a speech that lasted 20 minutes and left half the chamber in tears. It was the finest piece of diplomacy the Concord had seen in a century. Grand Archon Dravos responded the next morning. His holographic image filled the Senate chamber, 12 feet tall, his black insectoid body gleaming under the projection lights. He was old. His armor plates were scarred from wars that most living species had only read about. His eyes were empty of anything that could be called emotion. He listened to Ethan's proposal in silence. When it was finished, he tilted his head in a gesture that the Cathari used to show amusement. "No," he said. Then he played the feed. The holographic display shifted, and suddenly the Senate was looking at a live broadcast from Shael Mora. Cathari soldiers moved through the streets of a Veilani city, dragging civilians from their homes. Families were separated. Children screamed. The soldiers sorted the Velani into groups, with the cold efficiency of workers organizing supplies in a warehouse. Dravos explained, in a voice that carried no guilt and no shame, that the Velani would be used as biological resources. Their bodies would feed the hegemony's expansion. The feed cut to black. Lishara's legs gave out. Ethan caught her before she hit the floor. He held her, one arm around her waist, and she could feel his heartbeat against her back. Still steady. She was screaming. She did not remember starting. The Senate erupted. Delegates shouted. Some called for war. Some called for more negotiation. Some simply left, too horrified to speak. And then the second transmission came. This one was not broadcast to the full Senate. It was sent directly to Ethan's personal channel, routed through the station's communication system, so that it played on every screen in the room. Dravos appeared again. And this time, he was not alone. He was holding Revka. The child was alive but terrified. Her silver hair was matted. Her violet eyes were wide and wet with tears. She was wearing the same sleeping gown she had been wearing 3 days ago, which meant she had not been on the station at all. She had been taken from the transport ship that was supposed to bring her back. The Cathari had intercepted it before it reached the station. Lishara had thought her sister was safe. She had been wrong. Dravos held Revka up to the camera like a trophy. The child whimpered. The Archon's mandibles clicked. "You see, human?" Dravos said. "This is what softness earns." The transmission ended. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Lishara had ever heard. She was on the floor. She didn't remember falling again. Her vision was blurred with tears, and her chest was so tight she could barely breathe. Around her, every delegate in the room had gone completely still. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They were all looking at Ethan. He stood in the center of the chamber. He had not fallen. He had not screamed. He had not moved at all. He stood perfectly straight, his arms at his sides, his face completely empty. Lishara knew her husband's face better than she knew her own. She had seen it laugh, cry, think, dream, and love. She had never seen it look like this. It was as if someone had reached inside him and turned off everything that made him warm. What was left was something older than civilization, something that every species in the room, no matter how alien, recognized in their bones. It was the face of a predator that had just chosen its prey. Ethan moved. He walked to where Lishara sat on the floor and knelt beside her. He touched her face gently, brushed a tear from her cheek. For 1 second, his eyes softened. Just for her. "I am going to bring her home," he said. Then he stood, straightened his coat, and turned to the Senate. When he spoke, his voice had no warmth in it at all. No kindness, no charm. It was a voice that Lishara had never heard before, and it filled the entire chamber like cold water. "I gave you peace," Ethan said. "You should have taken it." He walked out of the Senate. His footsteps echoed in the silence. Lishara called his name. He did not turn around. She struggled to her feet and grabbed the arm of a human aide who was standing nearby. The young man was pale. His hands were shaking. "What is happening?" Lishara demanded. "Where is he going? What is he doing?" The aide swallowed. He could not meet her eyes. "He just activated the Prometheus contingency," the aide whispered. "What does that mean?" The aide looked at the door where Ethan had disappeared, and his face carried an expression that Lishara had never seen on a human before. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was pity. For the Cathari. "It means," the aide said quietly, "that God helped them." Lishara stood in the empty Senate chamber and stared at the door. Somewhere beyond it, her husband was walking towards something she did not understand. The man who cooked her meals, who sang lullabies, who cried when her mother called him son, had looked at her with those flat, empty eyes and become someone she had never met. She was not afraid of him. She was afraid of what the galaxy had just woken up. 12 hours after Ethan Mercer walked out of the Concord Senate, the galaxy learned something it had never wanted to know about humanity. The first reports came from deep space monitoring stations at the edge of explored territory. A Drethany sensor outpost near the Valen Nebula detected a massive energy signature appearing out of nowhere. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, similar reports flooded in from every corner of the galaxy. Something was emerging from places where nothing was supposed to exist. From inside gas giants. From hollowed-out asteroids in dead systems. From the dark spaces between stars, where no species had ever thought to look. Ships. Human ships. Hundreds of them. They were warships, and they were enormous. Each one was matte black, carrying no flags, no identification codes, and no names visible on their hulls. They ran completely silent. Their weapon systems were unlike anything in any known database. The galactic community had always believed that humanity's fleet was modest, perhaps 200 ships spread across their territory. A respectable force for a young species, but nothing that could challenge a true galactic power. That was a lie. The human Black Fleet numbered over 800 warships. They had been built in secret over 60 years, hidden in places no one would ever search, maintained by crews who officially did not exist. The ships themselves were classified at a level so high that most of Earth's own government didn't know about them. They were the product of a single, terrible question that humanity had asked itself after the first contact wars nearly wiped them out 2 centuries ago. The question was simple. If it happens again, how do we make sure we survive? The answer was the Prometheus contingency. On the station, Lishara sat in the intelligence center and read the files that Human Military Command had just declassified. Her hands were trembling. The words on the screen blurred and reformed as her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. The Prometheus contingency was not just a fleet. It was a complete war doctrine, a plan designed for one purpose: total, overwhelming, disproportionate response. It was built on a principle that the document's authors had written in plain language. If any species ever threatens what we love, the response must be so complete, so devastating, and so precise that no species in the galaxy will ever consider doing it again. And the man authorized to activate it, the single human being who held the key to the entire system, was designated Prometheus 1. His name was Ethan Mercer. Lishara stared at the screen. She read the words 3 times. She had been married to this man for 2 years. She had slept beside him, eaten his cooking, watched him cry at sad stories, laughed at his terrible jokes, and held his hand under alien skies. And the entire time, he had been carrying this inside him like a second heartbeat. She kept reading. The files contained his military record, the real one, not the polished version that the diplomatic corps had shown her before the wedding. Captain Ethan Mercer had served in the human Navy for 15 years. He had been decorated 9 times. He had been involved in 32 combat engagements. And then there was the siege of Cathari Prime. The siege had lasted 3 years. A hostile species called the Rethani had blockaded the Cathari homeworld, slowly starving its population. Every attempt to break the blockade had failed. 3 allied fleets had tried and been destroyed. The Galactic Concord was preparing to write off the Cathari as lost. Then they sent Ethan Mercer. He arrived with 12 ships. 12. The Rethani had 400. The galaxy expected him to negotiate, or retreat, or die. He did none of those things. In 11 minutes, Mercer executed a series of micro-jumps that placed his 12 ships inside the Rethani formation. Not in front of it, not around it. Inside it, scattered through the fleet like needles in a body. And then every ship fired in every direction at once. The Rethani fleet lost 14,000 soldiers in 11 minutes. Mercer lost 0. The blockade collapsed. The Cathari were saved. The tactic was so brutal, so creative, and so terrifyingly effective that the Concord classified the entire engagement. They buried it. They didn't want the galaxy to know what one human with 12 ships could do when he stopped being polite. And then they made him a diplomat. They dressed the wolf in soft clothes and sent him to shake hands. Lishara closed the file. She sat in the empty intelligence center and breathed. Her mind was spinning, trying to fit the man she loved into the shape of the man she was reading about. She kept looking for the contradiction, the place where the gentle husband and the military genius could not coexist. She couldn't find it, because there was no contradiction. Ethan was kind. That was true. He was genuinely, deeply, stubbornly kind. He loved cooking and poetry, and singing badly to children. He cried at sad stories, and remembered everyone's names, and believed, truly believed. that the universe could be better than it was. But he was also the man who broke the siege of Cathari Prime in 11 minutes. Both things were true. Both things lived inside him. And the kindness wasn't a mask over the violence. The kindness was a choice he made every single day, knowing exactly what he was capable of, knowing the full weight of what lived inside him, and choosing softness anyway. That was what made him terrifying. Not the warships, not the tactics, the fact that his gentleness was not weakness. It was discipline, and the galaxy had just watched that discipline break. The open-channel transmission reached every corner of known space 6 hours before the deadline. Ethan's face appeared on every screen, every holographic display, every communication device in the galaxy. He was standing on the bridge of a ship that no one had ever seen before. It was massive. Its designation, barely visible on the hull behind him, read Erebus. He looked directly into the camera and spoke in a voice that was perfectly calm and perfectly empty. To the Cathari hegemony. You have taken someone I love. You have 6 standard hours to return her unharmed and withdraw from all occupied systems. This is not a negotiation. This is not a threat. This is a statement of fact. After 6 hours, I will not negotiate. I will not accept surrender. I will not stop. He paused. The galaxy held its breath. You have made a mistake, Ethan said. You looked at my kindness and thought it meant I was harmless. I am going to teach you the difference. I am going to teach the stars what humans do when you touch our families. You have 6 hours. Use them wisely. The transmission ended. The Concord Senate scrambled to intervene. Ambassadors sent desperate messages to both sides. Mediators volunteered. Emergency sessions were called. Grand Archon Dravos watched the transmission in his command center aboard the Cathari flagship. He played it twice. Then he turned to his admirals and made a sound that, in the Cathari language, was the closest thing to laughter. He has 800 ships, Dravos said. We have 4,000. Let the human come. The 6 hours passed. The Cathari did not withdraw. They did not return Revka. They did not respond at all. On the bridge of the Erebus, surrounded by a fleet that the galaxy had never known existed, Ethan Mercer stood in silence. The countdown on the main display reached 0. Every officer on the bridge watched him. The air was so still it felt like the ship itself was holding its breath. Ethan looked at the star map. Somewhere on that map, in a cell on an occupied world, a small girl with silver hair was waiting for him. She called him Brother Star. She trusted him to come. He spoke one word. Begin. 800 warships moved as one, and the stars trembled. The first 60 seconds changed the galaxy forever. At exactly the moment the deadline expired, the human Black Fleet executed a maneuver that would later be studied in every military academy across known space. 800 warships performed simultaneous micro-jumps into 11 different Cathari-controlled star systems. Not sequential, not staggered, simultaneous. Every ship arrived at its target at the exact same second, as if the entire fleet shared a single mind. In those first 60 seconds, every Cathari orbital defense platform, across all 11 systems, went dark. Not destroyed. Disabled. Surgical strikes hit their power cores and communication arrays with a precision that should have been impossible at faster-than-light speeds. The platforms drifted in orbit, intact, but blind and silent. Ethan didn't want wreckage. He wanted them to watch what came next. On the Concord station, Lishera stood in the observation center, with dozens of alien delegates, all of them staring at the holographic, tactical display. The display showed the entire Cathari war zone, and it was lit up like a dying star. Blue dots marked human ships. Red dots marked Cathari forces. There were so many blue dots. The Drethanai ambassador, a veteran of 3 wars, watched the display with his mouth open. He had not spoken in 10 minutes. The Orani trade minister was weeping silently. The Silith delegate had pressed all 4 of its hands against the viewing glass, as if trying to push the images away. None of them had ever seen anything like this. Grand Archon Dravos commanded the largest standing military in the galaxy. 4,000 warships, bred and built for conquest over centuries. He ordered his fleet to intercept the humans with the confidence of a predator that had never met anything it couldn't kill. His confidence lasted approximately 4 minutes. The Cathari fleet moved in standard attack formations, the same formations that had crushed a dozen species before humanity had even learned to build fire. They were fast, disciplined, and overwhelming in number. 5 Cathari ships for every human one. It didn't matter. The human ships didn't fight like anything the Cathari had ever encountered. They didn't hold formations. They didn't advance in lines. They moved like water, like wind, like something alive. Every time the Cathari locked weapons on a human ship, the ship was already gone, already somewhere else, already firing from an angle that shouldn't have been possible. The human fleet flowed around the Cathari formations and struck from blind spots that the Cathari didn't even know they had. Behind every human ship was an artificial intelligence running on quantum cores that had been secretly learning and evolving for decades. These systems processed battlefield data in real time, predicting Cathari movements before the Cathari commanders even gave the orders. It was not a battle between equals. It was a game of chess, where one side could see the entire board, and the other side didn't know they were playing. The Cathari began to lose ships. Not in ones and twos, in dozens. Their formations broke apart. Their communications became desperate. Commanders screamed orders that were obsolete before the words left their mouths. And through it all, the human Black Fleet moved in perfect silence. No battle cries. No taunting transmissions. No emotion at all. Just cold. Absolute efficiency. The silence was worse than any war cry. It said, "This is not rage. This is something deeper than rage. This is what happens when you cross a line that should never have been crossed." On the occupied world of Shale Mora, the ground war was even more terrifying. Human Special Forces, a unit designated only as the Hades Division, dropped from orbit in matte black pods that carried no heat signature and made no sound. They landed in the middle of the Cathari occupation zone and began to move through the city like ghosts. The Cathari ground troops were elite soldiers, heavily armored, trained since birth for combat. The humans moved through them as if they weren't there. Every engagement lasted seconds. Every shot was precise. The Hades operatives didn't waste a single bullet. They didn't shout. They didn't hesitate. They cleared building after building, block after block, freeing Vaylani prisoners and neutralizing Cathari soldiers with a mechanical precision that made the insectoid warriors, creatures who felt no fear, feel something very close to it. In a holding cell beneath a Cathari command post, a small Vaylani girl with silver hair sat in the corner with her arms wrapped around her knees. She had been crying, but she had stopped hours ago. She had no tears left. She was cold and hungry, and she wanted her sister, and she wanted Brother Star. The wall of her cell exploded inward. A figure in black armor stepped through the dust. He was enormous by Vaylani standards, broad-shouldered and steady. He scanned the room, weapon raised, and then he saw her. He knelt down. He took off his helmet. Underneath, his face was young and tired and human. He smiled at her. "Hey there, little one," he said. "Your brother sent us." Revka's eyes went wide. She reached for him, and he picked her up gently, wrapping her in a thermal blanket, and carried her out. In orbit above Shale Mora, the Cathari defense fleet had ceased to exist. The human Black Fleet hung in perfect formation above the planet, silent and dark, like a crown of iron. But the true demonstration was yet to come. Ethan Mercer stood on the bridge of the Erebus and watched the tactical display. Reports flowed in from every theater. Cathari resistance was collapsing across all 11 systems. The ground team on Shale Mora had confirmed Revka's extraction. She was alive. She was safe. It was over. But Ethan didn't stop. He gave one more order. The Erebus and a formation of heavy warships jumped to the Cathari home system, the heart of the hegemony, the place where Dravos ruled from a throne built on the bones of conquered species. The Cathari home system had 3 suns. They were ancient, stable stars that had burned for billions of years. Around them orbited the Cathari homeworld and its 12 colony moons. 18 billion Cathari lived in this system. It was everything they had, everything they were. Ethan targeted the 3 suns, not to destroy them, The weapons he used were gravitational pulse emitters, devices that could reach into the heart of a star and shake its corona like a hand shaking a snow globe. The pulses hit all three suns simultaneously. The stars screamed. That was what it looked like. The coronas of all three suns erupted at once, sending massive flares of light and energy cascading outward in waves. The skies of every Cathari world turned white. Day became blinding. Night became day. The flares were not lethal. They would not kill anyone. They would not even damage the planets. But for 20 minutes, every Cathari in their home system looked up at their suns and watched them convulse, as if something had grabbed them and squeezed. The message was clear. Brutally, terrifyingly clear. We could have killed your stars. We could have burned your worlds. We could have ended your entire species in a single afternoon. We chose not to. This time, on his flagship, Dravos watched his empire's suns writhe. He had lived for 300 years. He had conquered 18 species. He had never known fear. He knew it now. He opened a communication channel to the Erebus. Ethan's face appeared on the screen. It was still calm, still empty, still carrying that terrible patience that was worse than any fury. Dravos looked at this human, this small, soft, emotional creature who sang lullabies and cooked meals and cried at sad stories. And he understood, finally, what he was looking at. He was looking at the most dangerous thing the galaxy had ever produced. Not because of the fleet, not because of the weapons, but because this man had chosen to be kind, and the universe had punished him for it. And now the universe was learning what happened when a good man stopped being gentle. Dravos spoke. The word he used had no equivalent in the Cathari language. His species had never needed it. He had to borrow it from the Vaylani. Mercy. Ethan stared at the screen for a long time. Behind him, through the bridge viewport, the Cathari suns still glowed white. Surrender, Ethan said. Withdraw from every system. Return every soul you took. Release every prisoner. And do it now. He paused. When he spoke again, his voice cracked for the first time. Just barely. Just enough. And pray that my wife forgives me for what I became tonight. The channel closed. The Cathari surrendered within the hour. The galaxy moved on quickly. Galaxies always do. Within a week, the Cathari hegemony had withdrawn from all 4 occupied systems. Their warships retreated behind their own borders and stayed there. Grand Archon Dravos signed a surrender agreement that stripped the hegemony of its offensive fleet, opened its borders to war crime investigators, and required the return of every prisoner taken during the invasion. It was the most one-sided treaty in galactic history, and Dravos signed it without a single objection. The Galactic Concord restructured itself. Humanity was given a permanent seat on the Security Council. The vote was unanimous, though Lishara noticed that the delegates did not clap when the decision was announced. They did not celebrate. They sat in silence and nodded, the way you nod when you lock a door that you realize should have been locked a long time ago. It was not gratitude. It was fear. The rescued Vaylani civilians returned home to Shail Mora. Families were reunited. Children found their parents. The dead were mourned. The living tried to remember how to sleep without flinching at every sound. Revka came home to the station on a human medical transport. Lishara was waiting at the docking port when the doors opened. The child walked out slowly, wrapped in a blanket that was too big for her, holding the hand of a human medic who looked like she had not slept in days. Revka saw her sister and ran. Lishara dropped to her knees and caught her. She held her so tightly that the child squeaked, and Lishara loosened her grip but did not let go. Could not let go. She pressed her face into Revka's silver hair, and breathed in, and felt something inside her chest crack open and flood. "You're safe," she whispered. "You're safe. You're safe. You're safe." Revka pulled back and looked at her with those enormous violet eyes. She had lost weight. There were shadows under her eyes that no child should carry. "Where is Brother Star?" Revka asked. Lishara did not know. Ethan had not returned to the station. He had not called. He had not sent a message. After the Cathari surrender, the Erebus and the Black Fleet had simply vanished from every sensor in the galaxy. disappearing back into the hidden places they had come from, as silently as they had arrived. Official channels told her that Captain Mercer was debriefing. Unofficial channels told her nothing at all. She waited. 1 day. 2 days. 5. On the 7th day, a small transport shuttle docked at the station without announcement. No escort. No ceremony. Ethan walked off it alone, wearing civilian clothes. He carried no bags. He looked thinner. His eyes were different. He walked through the corridors toward their quarters. People moved out of his way, not because they were afraid of him, because they could see something on his face that demanded silence, the way you stay quiet near someone who is grieving. Lashara was in the communications center when an aide told her he was back. She ran. She ran through the corridors of the station with none of the grace or composure that her diplomatic training demanded, and she did not care. She found the door to their quarters closed. She opened it. The room was dark. Every light was off. The viewport shutters were sealed. Ethan was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, his knees drawn up, his hands hanging between them. He was trembling. Lashara stood in the doorway and looked at him. This was her husband. The man who cooked her meals and remembered everyone's names. The man who sang lullabies. The man who had shaken the stars. He looked broken. She walked to him slowly. She lowered herself to the floor beside him. She did not speak. She just sat there, close enough to touch, and waited. The silence lasted a long time. "I promised myself," Ethan said. His voice was hoarse, thin. "After Cathari Prime, I stood on that bridge and looked at what I had done, and I promised myself I would never be that man again. I would be better. I would prove that humans could be more than what the galaxy thinks we are." He swallowed. "I built a whole life on that promise. Everything I did, the diplomacy, the cooking, the languages, all of it. I was trying to be the man who didn't need to burn things down, the man who could fix the universe with patience and kindness and enough time." His hands clenched, and they took her. They took that little girl, and they held her up like a trophy, and every single piece of it fell apart. Every wall I built, every choice I made, gone. In 1 second, he looked at his hands. The same hands that braided Revka's hair. The same hands that had just commanded a fleet that brought an empire to its knees. "I didn't even hesitate," he whispered. "That's the part that scares me. I didn't think about it. I didn't struggle. The moment I saw her on that screen, the kind man just disappeared, and the other one was right there, waiting. Like he'd never left." Lashara reached over and took his trembling hands in hers. She held them gently. She could feel the tension in every muscle, the way he was shaking from something that had nothing to do with cold. "You brought her home," Lashara said. "I almost killed 3 sons. But you didn't." "I wanted to." She squeezed his hands. "But you didn't." He closed his eyes. A tear ran down his face. Then another. Ethan Mercer, Prometheus 1, the man who had made the most powerful empire in the galaxy say a word it had never spoken before, sat on the floor of his quarters and cried. Lashara held his hands and let him. She understood now. She understood everything. His kindness had never been softness. It had never been the absence of violence. It was the presence of something much harder. It was a choice he made every single morning when he woke up and decided to be gentle, knowing full well what lived inside him, knowing the weight of what he was holding back. Every smile, every cooked meal, every lullaby was a small act of war against his own nature. And he had fought that war for years, alone, without telling anyone, because he wanted to be better, because he believed he could be. And when the universe had torn that choice away from him, the cost of going back was this trembling, this grief. Not for the Cathari, for the version of himself that he was afraid he had lost forever. The door opened softly. Revka stood there in her sleeping gown, her silver hair brushed, her eyes still carrying those shadows. She looked at Ethan on the floor. She looked at his tears. She did not hesitate. She walked over, climbed into his lap, and pressed her small silver forehead against his. It was a Vailani gesture, the most intimate one, the one reserved for the people you trust with your life. You came for me, she said quietly. I knew you would. Ethan broke completely. He wrapped his arms around the child and held her, and the sound that came out of him was not the controlled voice of a diplomat or the cold command of a fleet admiral. It was the raw, shaking cry of a man who had gone to war against the galaxy for a little girl who called him Brother Star, and who was only now realizing what it had cost him. Lishara wrapped her arms around them both and held them in the dark. They stayed like that for a long time. Months passed. The galaxy settled into an uneasy peace. The Cathari hegemony, humbled and stripped of its power, began the slow process of learning to exist without conquest. Other species watched humanity with new eyes. The jokes about soft, emotional humans stopped. A new saying spread among alien cultures, repeated in bars and council chambers, and whispered in the spaces between stars. A human's love is the most dangerous force in the universe. Not because of what they will do for you, but because of what they will do to anyone who takes you away. Lishara began writing. She sat at her desk each night, after Revka was asleep, and recorded her thoughts in a personal log. She did not know that this document would one day become the most widely read text in galactic history. She did not write it for history. She wrote it because she needed to understand. On the last page, she wrote this. I thought my husband was kind. I was right. But I did not understand what that meant. I thought kindness was the absence of violence. It is not. Kindness, in a human, is the choice to hold back an ocean. Every day, every hour, without anyone knowing the water is even there. And when the dam breaks, when something precious is threatened, stars themselves should tremble. I love him not in spite of what he is, but because of the war. He fights every morning to be gentle. He is the most terrifying thing in the universe. He is the most beautiful. She closed the log. In the other room, Ethan was standing at the viewport. The shutters were open again. Starlight fell across his face. Lishara came up beside him, and he turned to look at her. He smiled. Not the diplomat's smile. Not the charming performance he gave to crowded rooms. This one was small, and tired, and real. It was the smile of a man who was still putting himself back together, one piece at a time, and who knew it would take a long time, and who had decided to try anyway. She took his hand. He held it. They stood together and watched the stars. The same stars that had burned white with his wrath, now shone quietly in the dark, steady and ancient and unchanged. But they remembered. The stars always remember.